a few years back, we were focused on GMO labeling. We wanted to get a national GMO labeling solution in the United States. And we were organizing our members around this. And there were a number of states that had GMO labeling ballot measures. And one of these was the state of Washington, Initiative 527, about 5 years ago or so, and or 6 years ago. And so the state of Washington had this ballot measure up, and citizens were going to vote on whether they thought GMOs should be labeled. And it was very popular. But then this funny thing happened. A bunch of money came into the state to fund the No on 527 campaign. And it was donated by a group called the Grocery Manufacturers Association, which is kind of a consortium of the major junk food companies, if you will. And the odd thing was that there was no sense of who actually donated the money other than this one group, right? And we didn't know where did they get the money from? And Washington has campaign finance laws that make it illegal to not disclose where money actually comes from. And so they ended up donating about $30 million to this, which was the largest campaign contributions for any state initiative in the history of Washington. And with a massive amount of, I would say, lies and fraudulent ads and scare tactics, they made people think that the price of food was going to go up dramatically if GMOs were labeled, which makes no sense. Just slap a thing on a label. What is that going to do to the price of food, right? But they were all freaking people out about it. And so it ended up barely losing, just barely. But then the state law enforcement got involved, and they ended up concluding that there had been a campaign finance violation, and they forced the disclosure of who the GMA's donors were, and it was Coca-Cola and Pepsi and a bunch of other big junk food companies. And so that ended up resulting in an ongoing lawsuit that led to the largest fine for a campaign finance violation in American history. And the GMA was essentially put out of business by the lawsuit and the fines that came in afterwards. So it's pretty much disbanded now. But that didn't stop them from pulling off their final hurrah, if you will, was to kill this ballot initiative. And so I was feeling really sad that we'd kind of lost that struggle. I wanted to get GMOs labeled, and I thought if Washington could do it, we could make that no company is going to create special labels for Washington, so it would kind of become a national thing, right? But we lost, and I was disappointed. And one day I'm in the store with my son River. Yes, I have a son named River because the ocean refuses no river. I'm shopping for us in the store, and we passed this little smoothie section where there's Odwalas. Odwala is, this smoothie brand that's owned by Coca-Cola, and they were bought by them some years back. And so my son River looks at me as I'm pulling up a Mango Tango Odwala smoothie. I'm kind of hot, my blood sugar's a little low, and he's like, "So you want to give your money to Coke?" And I look at him and I'm like, I said, maybe if they make more smoothies, they'll make less soft drinks. So it's good, right? To help them move in a positive direction. And he just looks at me and he's like, "So you want to give your money to Coke?" And I just stopped, and I was like, I turned beet red, and I'm like, what kind of kid am I raising over here? But I was like, okay, I gotta own it here. So I put it back on the shelf. I was like, okay, I can't do that. I can't do it. So I can't set a bad example like that for my son. And so then I got this idea. I was like, wow, if my son is calling me out on this, then maybe other people would be concerned too. And I suddenly got this concept. I was like, what if we call for a boycott, not just of Coke, but of the natural brands that they own? They own not just Odwalla, but also they also own Honest Tea. They also own Vitamin Water and Dasani and a number of other natural brands. And so we decided to launch this boycott, and we ended up getting hundreds of thousands of people to sign on, calling on Coke to stop funding the fight against GMO labeling. That was our ask. And we just said, you don't have to endorse, going non-GMO. You don't have to go non-GMO. Just stop donating money to fight against it. And we ended up also reaching out to them and essentially saying, look, y'all say you support consumer empowerment and you say you support transparency, but we think that on this issue, you are on the wrong side of history. And so we finally wound up getting some meetings with senior vice presidents at the company, traveling out to Washington, D.C. We organized a campaign in tandem with Center for Food Safety and ended up meeting with them. And you know what they said? They said, this is really interesting. We actually support national solutions on GMO labeling, and we're open to labeling if necessary, but we can't do this all by ourselves. We're just one small company. I'm like, one small company, huh? But that's what they said. They're like, but let's get our friends together. So we ended up convening a series of meetings in Washington, D.C., where senior leadership from not just Coke, but also Nestle, the world's largest food company, Unilever, also one of the biggest, also the American Beverage Association, Mars, and several other major food brands came together with leadership from Center for Food Safety, Food Revolution Network, and also Just Label It. Environmental Working Group was involved for a time, and other organizations. We all met for a whole series of meetings. I just saw, I do not have audio. How do I fix this? Oh, I think that's just from maybe one individual. Hopefully everyone can still hear me. So we ended up meeting for a whole series of meetings in Washington, and I was asked to facilitate these meetings, and we kind of created a safe space where everyone could share. And our goal was to see if we could come up with an agreed approach to GMO labeling that the food movement and the food industry could get behind together. And a lot of the folks in the industry were saying, look, we want a solution here that's national, that doesn't look like a skull and crossbones, but we also are open to some degree of consumer empowerment and transparency. And we don't like spending millions of dollars looking like we're fighting against people knowing where their food comes from and how it's produced. And so we wound up organizing these meetings, and the response was really remarkable. We found common ground, and we ended up getting attorneys from both sides working together on some joint legislation we were prepared to introduce to Congress together that would have been a national GMO labeling solution. Unfortunately, we were all set to do this when Congress passed what food movement leaders call the DARK Act, or the Deny Americans Right to Know Act. And suddenly our efforts were eviscerated because something came in to fill the gap. And it was a sort of pseudo GMO labeling law. It's now in effect. And it means they have to label, but there's all kinds of loopholes so big it could drive a turnip truck through them. And there's also, it has to be in many cases, it's with QR codes, and you can scan with your smartphone on the back of a product label. And it's really not very legitimate, but it is a step. That said, we came really close to having legislation that would have been much more comprehensive and effective introduced together. And it would have been the first time in history that I'm aware of that leaders from the major food brands and leaders from the major food movement leader organizations had come together on something together. Didn't happen, but what did happen was that we built some connections and trust. And those relationships live in my heart forever. I don't know about y'all, but when I hear about some of the things that the corporate food industry is doing, it breaks my heart. It sometimes enrages me. It makes my blood boil. One of those companies is Nestle, which historically had a campaign to try to get their infant formula products distributed in the majority world, in the developing world. And they would give free formula to mothers at birth, right after they gave birth in hospitals, and they would get free formula. And it was just the amount that was necessary so that their milk would dry up. And then they'd be dependent on infant formula for the rest of their babe's nursing life, because they didn't have milk to give them. And they'd have to use water from often polluted sources. And they'd have to buy formula with money they didn't have because their bodies couldn't give their baby what they were designed to do. And we now know, of course, that breast is best. And so whole generations of children grew up on infant formula and have suffered from serious health problems as a result. And this was a business move on the part of a company that had massive negative impact on public health. So I grew up hearing those stories. And in my mind, Nestle also combining that with the chocolate industry and the way that people are being enslaved in the chocolate industry, Nestle was practically evil. But here I was sitting down with a senior vice president of Nestle, and we became something of friends. I have twins, she has twins. We connected, we made friends, we talked about a lot of issues, we had really hard conversations. And I realized people in the junk food industry, I use that term obviously somewhat broadly, they don't stay up all night trying to figure out how to make our kids sick, how to poison the environment, how to torture animals. No, they're trying to make a living. They're trying to run their company as best they can in accordance with the best values they can manifest in a toxic food culture. And it doesn't do anybody any good if every time a company does the right thing, they go out of business. So Nestle, they'll acknowledge that most of their food is super unhealthy. As my friend pointed out to me, she said, we have made it our point to try to focus on making tasty food affordable and accessible to lots and lots of people. That's been our goal. And health has been a side element. But she also said the challenge is whenever we do make healthier options, like we've tried some stuff with less sodium, less sugar, less bottled oils, more wholesome ingredients, it doesn't sell well. So it just sits there, and that doesn't do anybody any good. We offer stuff that nobody buys, like that doesn't help. So I realized how important it is for organizations like ours that are mainly focused on consumer empowerment and spreading awareness to keep doing our work, because we create the demand that inspires companies like Nestle to change ingredients and practices. So I think it's all connected, right? Obviously, there's a need for some accountability and leadership at the corporate level, but I also recognize how important our work is, and that in some interesting way, we're actually working together because folks at companies like Nestle want to do the right thing, and they want to be on the right side of history. They're not trying to pollute the environment. If they could make just as much money making healthy food, you bet they'd do it. But they're fundamentally economically driven creatures, and they're not even creatures, they're entities, if you will. That's what the corporate structure has created. And so as individuals, we get to participate in this and hopefully create some changes. And I'm really grateful to recognize that the food movement, if you will, is getting really broad and really diverse. And people are finding their part in it all over the world. Right now, the state of Wyoming is having all of their employees participate in a program that we created, an educational program that's giving them educational resources to help them learn about health and learn about food and implement healthier food choices. The state of Wyoming is not typically considered at the center point of the healthy food movement. But like everybody, people in Wyoming and state employees in Wyoming, they all have bodies, they all eat, and they all would rather be healthy than sick. So why not give them the knowledge they need to put this into practice? And so, I think these are all examples of ways that this movement is spreading. And I just want to say you're part of it. So thank you for that.